Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. A very warm welcome to this Monday, 25th September 2023 morning Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam discussion. Today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 9. Before we discuss on this verse, let's sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Shri Radhe Jai Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Shri Radhe Jai Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari Jaya Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Shodra Shadashi Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय वृंदावन धाम की जय मथुरा धाम की जय जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय मायापुर धाम की जय Ganga Mai ki jai, Yamuna Mai ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samved Bhaktorinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshitarine. Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamastu Krishne Matirastu Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 9. Ekam ekatarābhāve yadā nopalabhāmahe tritayaṁ tatra veda ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ. Ekam ekatarābhāve yadā nopalabhāmahe tritayaṁ tatra veda ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ. Ekam ekatarābhāve yadā nopalabhāmahe tritayaṁ tatra veda ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ. Synonyms: ekam, one; ekatara, another; abhave, in the absence of; yada, because; na, does not; nopalabhāmahe, perceptible; tritayaṁ, in three stages; tatra, there; yah, the one; veda, who knows; saha, he; ātmā, the super soul; sva, own; ashraya, shelter; ashrayah, of the shelter. Translation: all three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter, is independent of all, and therefore he is the supreme shelter. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. There are innumerable living entities, one dependent on the other, in the relationship of the controlled and the controller. But without the medium of perception, no one can know or understand who is the controller and who is the controller. For example, the sun controls the power of our vision. We can see the sun because the sun has its body and the sunlight is useful only because we have our eyes. Without our having eyes, the sunlight is useless, and without sunlight, the eyes are useless. Thus, they are interdependent, and none of them is independent. Therefore, the natural question arises concerning who made them interdependent. The one who has made such a relationship of interdependence must be ultimately completely independent. As stated in the beginning of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the ultimate source of all interdependent objectives is a complete independent subject. This ultimate source of all interdependence is the Supreme Truth or Paramatma, the Super Soul, who is not dependent on anything else. He is svāśrayāśrayaḥ. He is only dependent on his self, and thus he is the supreme shelter of everything. Although Paramatma and Bhagwan are subordinate to Bhagwan, Paramatma and Brahman are subordinate to Bhagwan because Bhagwan is Purushottama, or the super person. He is the source of the super soul also. In the Bhagavad Gita 15.18, Lord Krishna says that he is a Purushottama and the source of everything. And thus it is concluded that Sri Krishna is the ultimate source and shelter of all entities, including the super soul and Supreme Brahman. Even accepting that there is no difference between the super soul and the individual soul is dependent on the super soul for being liberated from the illusion of material energy. The individual soul is under the clutches of illusory energy, and therefore, although qualitatively one with the super soul, he is under the illusion of identifying himself with matter. And to get out of this illusory conception of factual life, the individual soul has to depend on the super soul to be recognized as one with him. In that sense, also, the super soul is the supreme shelter, and there is no doubt about it. The individual living entity, the jiva, is always dependent on the super soul Paramatma, because the individual soul forgets his spiritual identity, whereas the super soul Paramatma does not forget his transcendental position. In the Bhagavad Gita, these separate positions of the Jivatma and the Paramatma are specifically mentioned. In the 4th chapter, Arjuna, the Jiva's soul, is represented as a forgetful of his many, many previous births, but the Lord, the Super Soul, is not forgetful. The Lord even remembers when he taught the Bhagavad Gita to the sun god some billions of years before. The Lord can remember such millions and billions of years, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 7.26 as follows: Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna bhavishyani cha bhutani mam tu vedana kaschana. The Lord, in his eternal blissful body of knowledge, is fully aware of all that happened in the past, that which is going to on at the present, and also what will happen in the future. But in spite of his being the shelter of both the Paramatma and Brahman, persons with a poor fund of knowledge are unable to understand him as he is. The propaganda of the identity of cosmic consciousness with the consciousness of the individual living entities is completely misleading, because even such a person or individual soul as Arjuna could not remember his past deeds, although he is always with the Lord. And what can the tiny ordinary man, falsely claiming to be one with the cosmic consciousness, know about his past, present, and future? Before we discuss on this verse, let us offer some prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namashreshtam Manavapi Shachiputram Matra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Murupurim Mathurim Goshthavati Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Adadandastranam Dante Damyacha Punah Punah Shriman Rupa Padambhojam Dhulisyam Janma Janmani. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the verse Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 2.10.9. Ekam ekatarābhāve yadā nopalabhāmahe tritayaṁ tatra veda sa ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ. All three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter, is independent of all, and therefore he is the supreme shelter. So in this particular verse, the explanation of Krishna's state as Swarat is being established. In the first verse of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Janmadhya asya yataha anvayaditaratascha abhignyas Swarat. So that word Swarat is being mentioned in the first verse of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And this particular verse is explaining that Swarat word in detail. Swarat is the independence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everything else is dependent on Krishna. And Krishna himself is supremely independent. So this is because as Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that aham sarvasya prabho mattas sarvam pravartate. Iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is the origin of everything. Everything is emanating from him. So everything is dependent on Krishna in that way. Nothing is independent from Krishna. This is the transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagad avyaktamurtina matsthani sarvabhutani na chaham teshu avasthita. Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is pervaded everywhere in the form of his energy. So this energy is emanating from the energetic. So this is the energy is the Shakti. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead is all attractive. That's why his name is Krishna. Ishvara Paramaha Krishna. Krishna means one who attracts everyone to him. So one might know that one is attracted to Krishna, or one might not know that one is attracted to Krishna. But internally, everyone is eternally part and parcel of Krishna. As Krishna mentions, Mama eva amsha jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanātana. So all the living entities are my eternal part and parcels, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So then what is the reason that the living entities are in this material universe? Manaha shashtani indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. When there is identification with the mind and the five senses, and the mind is called the sixth sense, one is struggling in this material universe. Karshati. So Krishna used the word karshati. So we have got Krishna and we have got karshati, karshanam. So if we are attracted to Krishna, there is no karshana. Krishna is all attractive. So when one gets attracted to the all attractive, there is no struggle in this material universe. Karshana, karshati. So this is really important to understand, because when we are linked to Krishna and when we are in our original state of eternally every moment being attached to Krishna, automatically the attachment to the material world is gone away. Bhakti paraisha anubhava viraktir anyatra syat esha trisha ekakalaha. It is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that when one has bhakti, that is a loving devotional service to Krishna, para isha anubhava, that experience of Krishna. Krishna is para isha, the Supreme Lord. Anubhava, that is the experience of the Supreme Lord. So when we have devotion for the Lord, we have the experience of the Supreme Lord. Bhakti para isha anubhava, and then immediately there is virakti, anyatra syat. There is detachment from everything else other than Krishna. When there is attachment to Krishna, automatically there is detachment to everything else other than Krishna. Otherwise, one is attached to the material energy of Krishna, but not to Krishna himself. That is the difference between a conditioned living entity and a living entity who is on the path to go back home, back to Godhead. What is the difference? The difference is that the conditioned living entity is attached to the energy of the Lord. Mama Maya. And Krishna says, it is my energy. Devi Hesha Gunamai Mama Maya Duratyaya. This material energy is Devi, divine. Devi Heshi Gunamai Mama Maya Duratyaya. Very difficult to overcome, Krishna says. But how can one overcome Krishna's divine material energy? Mameva ye prapadyante. Krishna says, anyone who surrenders unto me, mayam ekam tarantite. I help them to cross over the material energy. This is the transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. That he has, because it is his energy, so he can easily help the person who is surrendered onto him. But when does one surrender onto someone? This is a very important question. What does surrender mean? Sharanagati. Anukulasya sankalpa pratikulasya varjanam. Rakshishyati iti vishvaso goptritve varnam yatha. Ātmā nikshepa karpanya shradvidhi sharanagati. So this is what is the definition of sharanagati. The surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How does one know that one is in the direction of going back home, back to Godhead? when these 6 different characteristics are evident in the person. What are the 6 different characteristics? Anukulasya sankalpa. That one is engaged in whatever is favorable for loving Krishna. Then there is pratikulasya varjanam. The pratikulasya varjanam is one is not engaging in any activity that is not helping one to develop one's attachment to Krishna. Rakshishyati iti vishvaso. The third is that one is 100% confident that Krishna is the protector. Goptrutve varnam yatha. Goptrutve varnam yatha is that one is 100% sure that Krishna is the actual guardian. There is this beautiful prayer, Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva, tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva, tvameva vidya dravinam tvameva, tvameva sarvam mama deva deva. So this beautiful prayer in the Vedas talks about how the devotee knows that everything is Krishna's. So actually Krishna is the mother and father. Mata cha pita tvameva, tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva is actually the relative and all the friends. Vidya dravinam tvameva is actually the knowledge and also the wealth. And you are everything, oh my Lord. So this is that sense of total surrender onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in that is the Goptritve Varnam Yatha. Then there is ātmā nikshepa karpanya. ātmā nikshepa is this total self-surrender onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And karpanya. Karpanya is humility. So when one has got these 6 qualities, then one knows that one is going in the direction of sharanagati, surrender onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And surrender happens when there is love for the person. So that love is prema pumartho mahan. As Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions, that the love for the Lord transcends the chatur purusharthas, the 4 pillars of human existence, which is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Execution of religious principles, sense gratification, economic development, and then the 4th is liberation. So artha. So first there is execution of religious principles, then there is economic development, then there is sense gratification, and then there is liberation. So these are called the chatur purusharthas. So in the human form of life, because one has got this human body, so one is using this body in terms of engaging in the service of Krishna, because it is Krishna's. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincham jagatyam jagat. So Krishna, it is mentioned in Sri Ishopanishad, the first verse, that everything belongs to Krishna. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. So that includes our so-called body, mind, and everything else. So naturally, when something that is naturally related to someone is used in their service, that is the real objective of the existence of that particular person. So here in this particular verse, if we look at the first, we can try and understand the 4 lines here. The first line is saying ekam ekatarābhāve, and the translation is one another in the absence of. Yadā nopalabhāmahe, because does not perceptible. So Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the interdependence of all the things with each other. So, and we can see this very clearly in this material universe. Everything is dependent on each other. For example, the trees are dependent on the human beings for carbon dioxide, and we are dependent on the trees for oxygen. And unfortunately, due to afforestation and all the other activities that humans have been involved in for the technological development and other things, unfortunately, we are causing a lot of difficulties on the planet Earth. So this is the wonderful nature of human intelligence, that we have so much intelligence that we can actually disturb the natural situation to our own satisfaction. And unfortunately, our satisfaction can indirectly result in destroying the natural equilibrium that is naturally maintained if we do not interfere. But the moment we have started interfering with our intelligence, even though we have created wonderful situation for us in terms of the progress that we have made in technological advancement and everything else, unfortunately, it is also resulting in the natural equilibrium of the planet being taken away. Naturally, if for example the human being was like any other animal, we would not have done what we have done to planet Earth. This shows the amazing intelligence and amazing capabilities that we have in this human form of life, and we have used it very well to bring us to the place where we are at the moment. For example, we have these wonderful buildings, wonderful roads, infrastructure, all the cars, the aeroplanes, everything. We can travel from millions and millions of miles now as well, with the rockets and all those advanced technologies. But then, unfortunately, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if one is not considering how these actions are contributing to the disturbance of the natural equilibrium of the planet, then it is going to affect the natural equilibrium, and then it is going to cause all the challenges that we experience in terms of everything else that is happening. So this is the interdependence of all the things with each other. So Srila Prabhupada gives a very good example of the eyes and the light coming from, for example, the sunshine. So they are interdependent on each other. The eyes cannot see without the light, and if one does not have eyes, even if there is light, one cannot see. So both eyes and light are needed for one to see everything else. So this is the interdependence. So if we have ears, but if the air is not present and the sound is not flowing through the air, then we cannot hear. So similarly, the taste, the touch, the smell, all the senses, they are dependent on the sense objects for enjoyment. So there is the dependence between the senses and the sense objects, and the medium through which those sense objects are appearing. So everything has got these aspects of interdependence. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead is svāśrayāśrayaḥ. That is the last word of this verse. And before we go to that last word, there is tritayaṁ, tatra veda. So in three stages, there the one who knows, ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ, svāśraya, own shelter of the shelter. So this is bhidyate hridaya grantis, chidyante sarva samshaya, kshiyante chasya karmani, drishtam evatmanishware. So this is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, that once bhidyate hridaya granthi. So the hard knots which is present in the heart is taken away. Kshiyante sarva samshaya. So this is the transcendental position of engaging in the loving devotion service of Krishna. That the hard knots of material existence is removed, and one becomes purely in love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So that love for the Lord is something that is transcendental. It is not the That's why it's called Prema Pumartho Mahan. So there is a religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. The love for the Lord even is above the liberation. Mukti Swayam Mukulitanjali Sevate Asman Dharmartha Kamagataya Samaya Pratiksha. It is said by Bilva Mangala Thakur, Bhakti Swai Bhagavata Bhagwan Yadi Syad Daivena Na Phalati Divya Kishora Murti. So when one has got that loving devotional service for Krishna, love for the Lord, um, even the Mukti Swayam Mukulitanjali Sevate Asman, even the goddess of liberation stands with folded hands in front of that person. But the person is so much engrossed in love for Krishna that one is not even concerned with liberation. This is the most transcendental, topmost position of being in love with the Lord, that even liberation becomes insignificant. What to speak of the other three purusharthas, the, the things that are done in human form of life, the religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification. Liberation is the topmost, and even the liberation becomes insignificant. Kaivalyam narakayate tridashapur akasha pushpayate durdantendriya kala sarpa patali prodkhata damshayate yad karunya kataksha vaibhavatam tam gauram evastuma. So this is said by Prakashananda Saraswati. He says that this becoming one with Brahman feels like hell. Kaivalyam narakayate. So that is the liberation in the impersonal form of path, where one thinks that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is impersonal, and in that state, one is meditating on Aham Brahmasmi. I am ātmā Brahma. So this is Prajnanam Brahma. All these are Veda Vakyas, and in this Veda Vakyas, it is said that in that impersonal path of where the Gyanis, the people who are after knowledge only, without devotion, in that path, one is meditating on the impersonal aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and considering that as a supreme. But Krishna actually mentions in Bhagavad Gita, Klesho adhikaras tesham avyakta asakta chetasam avyakto hi gatir dukkham deha vadbhiravapyate. Krishna mentions that the path of the people who are going into the avyakta. Avyakta is the impersonal, without personality. Vyakti means a person, and avyakta is without a personality. Avyaktam vyakti mapannam manyante mama buddhaya. And so Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that someone who is unintelligent thinks that I was impersonal and I became a person. Param bhava majananta mama bhuta maheshwaram. So this is the transcendental position of Krishna, that Krishna, the personality of Krishna is transcendental. There is no, it's not like someone who is in a conditioned state of existence having a personality. It's not. Krishna's personality is totally transcendental. So this is, and actually, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyayasya cha shashvatasya cha dharmasya sukhasya ikantikasya cha. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that the Brahman is dependent on the Lord. Pratishta aham. So Krishna mentions that the basis of Brahman is me. So even Brahman and Paramatma are dependent on Bhagavan. So this is Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yadjnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. As it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, this advayam, it is non-dual. In what way is it non-dual? In the way that Brahman and Paramatma are dependent on Bhagavan. In that way, they are independent. They are non-different, because Bhagavan is the source of everything. As Krishna himself is saying, Aham sarvasya prabhavo. Aham evasam evagre nanyad yat sadasat param. Pasyadaham yadetacha yo avashishyate sosmiyam. That is the first verse of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the 4 seed verses. Krishna says that I was present before everything else existed, and I will be present after everything gets annihilated. This is the Balam Mukundam Manasa Smarami. Karara Vindena Padaravindam Mukharavinde Viniveshayantam. Vatasya Patrasya Pute Shayanam Bala Mukundam Manasa Smarami. So this is a very beautiful prayer where it is mentioned how just like a child, after they're born, after maybe few months, they take their leg and they take their leg with their hand, and then they can put their leg in their mouth. So this we see, and this is said about Krishna when he was child. This is the so his lotus, with his lotus like hand, he takes his lotus like feet and puts in his lotus mouth. Kararavindena padaravindam mukharavinde viniveshayantam. And he is in that vatasya patrasya puteshayanam balam mukundam manasasmaram. So Mukunda Bhakta Priya Vasudeva. So this is what Mukti Dadati Karechit Smana Bhakti Yoga. This is Krishna. He can sometimes award liberation, but very rarely does he give loving devotional service to him. It is the topmost level of existence in the human form of life. When one somehow or other gets that inclination to love the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the summum bonum of existence. Srila Prabhupada mentions. So here, this is what we are trying to understand here. And Srila Prabhupada actually mentions about, we can just read from the purport. Srila Prabhupada mentions he is only dependent on his self. And thus he is the supreme shelter of everything. Although Paramatma and Brahman are subordinate to Bhagwan, but because Bhagwan is Purushottama, or the Supreme Person, he is a source of Super Soul also. So in Bhagavad Gita 15.18, Lord says that he is Purushottama. So that particular verse is Yasmat Ksharam Atitoham Aksharadapi Chottama Atosmi Loke Vedecha Pratitah Purushottama. So that is what is mentioned here. Because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. So this is what Srila Prabhupada quotes in the purport. And then Srila Prabhupada mentions Lord Krishna says that he is a Purushottama and the source of everything. And thus it is concluded that Sri Krishna is the ultimate source and shelter of all living all entities, including the Super Soul and Supreme Brahman. And then Srila Prabhupada continues, even accepting that there is no difference between the Super Soul and the individual soul, the individual soul is dependent on the Super Soul for being liberated from the illusion of material energy. The individual is under clutches of illusory energy, and therefore, although qualitatively one with the Super Soul, he is under the illusion of identifying himself with the matter. This is a very important difference between the conditioned living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna's name is Achyuta. Achyuta means one who never falls down. So the living entities have this tendency to fall down because of the infinitesimal nature. The living entities have the tendency, and Krishna is giving full independence to the living entities as well in terms of what they want to do. So Krishna is not forcefully controlling the living entities. So the living entities have got that that independence to decide what they want to do. But one of the most important things here and interesting thing is that when one surrenders onto Krishna, Krishna personally takes care of that person. So this is the greatness of surrendering onto the Lord. Then Krishna actually mentions in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as well, Yasyaham anugrahanami harishye tad dhanam shanai tato dhanam tyajati yasya swajano dukkha dukhitam. It's quite an interesting aspect there, that Krishna says that when I give someone special blessing, I take away their material wealth. it's quite an interesting, and then they're totally dependent on Krishna. So it's a wonderful situation to be in, where one one understands that everything is a mercy of Krishna. The so-called good and the so-called bad, Dvaite Bhadra Bhadra Sakale Saman, E Manda E Bhala Sab Manodharma. It is mentioned in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that in this world of duality, the so-called good and the so-called bad is, there is not much difference between the two, because anyway it is temporary. So this is the, it's like being attached to something that is constantly changing, and that is the unfortunate situation in this conditioned state of existence, that one is constantly being attached to things which are ephemeral. It's not going to stay there forever. So what is going to stay there forever? It is our existence as an eternal part and parcel of Krishna, that we are, and that's always existing, and our eternal existence, which is free from this constant change of bodies that takes place. The Srila Shankaracharya mentions in Bhaja Govindam, Punarapi Jananam Punarapi Maranam Punarapi Janani Jatare Shainam Iha Samsare Bahudustare Kripaya Pare Pahi Murare. So Srila Shankaracharya mentions about the situation where the living entity is unfortunately taking birth and dying. Bahunam Janmanamante Gyanvan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sadurlabha. So after many births and many deaths, a person in knowledge surrenders onto Krishna. So the end of knowledge is devotional service. This is the Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam cha yadā hetukam. So there is two ways of coming to the place of total love for Krishna. One way is when one has got that spiritual knowledge, and that knowledge, the end of that knowledge is understanding that everything is Krishna's, and therefore my goal is to engage in unalloyed devotional service of Krishna. So that is one way. Another way is one has actually started in the direction of loving devotional service to Krishna, and then one realizes that the knowledge is just a kind of, it is an offshoot. The knowledge and renunciation, it's a byproduct of engaging in devotional service of the Lord. So that is that beautiful verse, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janeti Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam cha yadā hetukam. So when one is engaged in that loving devotional service to Krishna, one realizes that the knowledge and renunciation are just a byproduct of being in love with the Lord. And being in love with Krishna is easy for someone who is simple in their thought process. It is simple for the people who are simple, and it is unfortunately complicated for the people who are complicated. So what does this mean? Bhoga Ishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Pahrata Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Samadho na Vidiyate. Now Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that if someone is attached to Bhoga and Aishwarya, Bhoga is sense gratification, Aishwarya is showing off that I'm a great person. So if someone is attached to that, Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam, very much attached to that, Taya Apahrata Chetasam. So unfortunately their mind has been kidnapped by the material energy. Taya Apahrata Chetasam. Then there is Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Samadho na Vidiyate. Then unfortunately that one-pointed love for the Lord does not take place in that situation. That is a kind of complicated situation. And what is the simple situation? The simple situation is Vyavasayatmika Buddhir ekeha kurunandana. So that is the Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, a person who has got that one-pointed love for Krishna. that is only there. So whatever the person is doing, the mind is always with Krishna. So, and it is the mind that is the most important aspect here. Physically, one might be anywhere doing whatever things one wants to do, but if the mind is not at that place, the physical presence at that place has got a very less value. But one might be physically somewhere else, but if the mind is always fixed at the lotus feet of the Lord, that is very powerful, extremely powerful. So that is why Krishna says, Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijani priyosini. Mame vaishyasi yuktva evam ātmānam mat parayana. So this man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru, the four things that Krishna asks all the living entities to do, that is there in 2 verses in Bhagavad Gita. So give your mind to me, manmana bhava mad bhakta, become my devotee, madhyaji mam namaskuru. Offer your prayers to me, offer your obeisances to me. So in one verse Krishna says, mame vaishyasi yuktvayam atmanam mat parayana. So when one is full of love for Krishna, automatically at the end of one's life, one goes back home, back to Godhead. And then mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane prayosime. In the next verse, Krishna says that to Arjuna, that you'll surely come back to me, Arjuna. And this is the truth. I'm telling this to you because you are my very dear friend. Pratijane priyosine. So this is the transcendental position of remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna has been so costlessly merciful that he has these unlimited pastimes that he has. So it's very, if one wants to remember the Lord, there are unlimited pastimes that the Lord has. And one can remember any of those unlimited pastimes, and immediately one regains back one's pure love for Krishna. It is a question of not even regaining, realizing that love is already present. Ditya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabo Noy. Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Koroyo Uday. So as it is mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that this Krishna Prema, this love for the Lord, is not something that is external and one needs to go out externally and get it. It is present within the heart of all the living entities. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishta mattah smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So this is the Paramatma form of Krishna, and he is present in the heart of all the living entities. And he says that from me comes remembrance, forgetfulness, and knowledge. And so this remembrance, and it is based on the living entity actually wanting to remember Krishna. That is the difference. So in the conditioned state of existence, unfortunately, one gets enamored by the material energy. So then one does not actually, even if Krishna is personally present, one will not see Krishna or experience Krishna. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavrita. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is not visible to everyone, because so there is this Mahamaya potency, which is the material energy of the Lord, and then there is Yogamaya potency, which is the spiritual energy of the Lord. So both of these, so the material energy of the Lord is is enamoring the living entity through various sense gratificatory activities, and then the living entity is missing out on understanding Krishna as he is. So that is a position of the material energy, and then the spiritual energy is always with Krishna, and the spiritual energy is also only allowing the darshan of Krishna to the people who are surrendered onto Krishna. We can actually understand this even from a material perspective. In the material perspective, they call about the filtering system. So everyone has got this filtering system in them inbuilt, and depending on what the frame of mind is, one sees that particular situation. For example, a classic example that is given about the filtering system is that if someone is thinking about one particular, say, car, uh, and one has bought that particular car, suddenly one starts seeing that car more than one had previously seen it. What is the reason? That the filtering system is activated. So with that filtering system, one is actually, even though they were present before, but because the consciousness was not looking for that, one did not see it before. But once one has bought a particular model, suddenly one starts seeing it more. So what does this mean? It means that whatever we are keeping in our consciousness, we are seeing the same thing everywhere. So if in the consciousness, if we have Krishna, love for Krishna, we'll see love for Krishna everywhere. And this is a kind of the wonderful situation of the this Mahabhagavata. So there is this Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. So the person who has begun the devotional service journey, the person who is gone a little bit more forward, and the person who is always in love with the Lord at every moment. So the person who is always in love with Krishna at every moment, such a person sees that everyone is a greater devotee than me. So this is the wonderful situation of the Mahabhagavata. The topmost devotional, the person involved in topmost devotional service. So it is said there's a particular verse where it is said that one is in that state of Uttama Adhikari, because one is totally in connection with Krishna at every moment. That consciousness is activated. The pure love for Krishna consciousness is activated. And in that pure love for Krishna, one is always seeing that everything is engaged in love for Krishna. And actually, that is the natural state. So that's not wrong as well, because that is the natural state of all the living entities. It's everyone is, whether one knows it or not, Krishnas. They're all Krishnas. They're all equally samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshyotsi na priya. Ye bhajanti me bhaktiya mahite teshu chapya. Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is equal to all the living entities. There is no one extremely dear or extremely, or Krishna is antagonistic to anyone. Na dveshyotsi na priya. Ye bhajanti tume bhaktiya mahite teshu chapya. So this is the reciprocal relationship that exists between the living entities and Krishna. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tamstateva bhajamya. Mama vartamanu vartante manushya partha sarvasha. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, so whatever way one wants the relationship with the Lord reciprocates accordingly. And if someone wants to forget the Lord, unfortunately, the Lord will give those circumstances to that living entity to forget him, which is unfortunate. But that is what the living entity has desired. The Krishna this is a wonderful, costless mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That he is not forcing anything on the living entity. The living entity is independent to choose whether the living entity wants to love Krishna or not. And depending on what the living entity is choosing, they are experiencing whatever experiences they experience. But when one is totally surrendered onto Krishna, then it does not matter what experiences. It might be so-called good materially or so-called bad materially, but it doesn't matter. Because one knows that all these are temporary. All these experiences are yehi sansparshaja bhoga dukkhayo nayavate adyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that all these experiences that one experience in the material existence, because actually even the so-called happiness has got within its womb, unfortunately, a lot of sorrow. Why? We can give an example of some attachment that one has, for example, very close attachment to family member or something. Uh, uh, Even though that attachment is bringing in lots of love, etc., but the same attachment, when it is broken, gives, if not the same, even more amount of sorrow. And unfortunately, somewhere or the other, it has to get broken in this material world, because one is not going to live eternally in this material world, in a particular body, of course. So the body is keeps on changing. And Krishna has given a beautiful example of how living entity puts on a new cloth, gives up the old cloth and puts on a new cloth. Similarly, the living entity, the soul, uh, uh, gives up the old body and takes on a new body. So this is so this is the position of the living entities in this vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grananti naroparani tarha shariraya vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. So that is the verse where Krishna is mentioning that as a living entity, as a person takes off the old cloth and puts on a new cloth, similarly the living entity gives up the old body and puts on a new body. And this is in the material existence, this is the what needs to be solved. Yeah. So the biggest solution that's needed is understanding how one can come out of this cycle of birth and death. And one of the things that the science is trying through material means is to do all these things materially. So one is trying to build some chemicals which will help one not to age. One might try to build something that one will not die. One might try to build something that one will not get diseases. Okay, just imagine science becomes successful in doing all this. But can the the situation of mental torture that happens, unfortunately, if one identifies with the body, can that be taken away? If, for example, science is able to make a person live a disease-free life, an old age-free life, and a death-free life, and science is able to make one live eternally, but what is the use of such an eternal life if in that eternal life one is unfortunately not happy? Can that be removed? So that can only be removed when one knows one's original constitutional position as being eternal spiritually, not in a material bodily way. In a material bodily way, even if one is able to make one's body totally perfect, there is this aspect of mind as well. How is one going to deal with that? Can science create something that will keep the mind very peaceful? So if we are trying to approach things externally, it is always going to be very difficult. But if we approach it internally, we'll know that all the solutions are already there. One does not have to endeavor from external into internal. One can go from internal to external, and one can understand that internally everyone is eternal and everyone is eternally part and parcel of Krishna. And that understanding is what we get from this particular verse. Ekam ekatarābhāve yadā nopalabhāmahe tritayaṁ tatra veda sa ātmā svāśrayāśrayaḥ. All three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them as a shelter of the shelter, is independent of all, and therefore he is the supreme shelter. So when one understands that Krishna is Swarat, Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikave, Janmadhyasya yatah anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhignya swarat. As we mentioned in the beginning, this particular verse is a detailed explanation of the word swarat, which is independent. So it is very clearly explaining how Krishna is totally independent and everything else that is emanating from Krishna are interdependent with each other. And they are interdependent on Krishna as well, because Krishna is providing them all the because everything is coming from Krishna. So in that way, their existence depends on Krishna, but Krishna himself is Swarat, independent, and that is the transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if the living entities can somehow or other love the Lord as much as they can, then ultimately one will realize that one was never separate from Krishna. One is always with Krishna. With this, I would like to conclude this discussion. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Krishna Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.